Hello and welcome back to the Acceleration Netcast. In today's episode, we're going to be doing basically the same thing we did last week. We're just going to be doing it with PowerQuery. So if you remember last week, we had data that looked vaguely like this, which is to say we had these weeks on the top. So this is like 2014 week 51, this is 2015 week 2, and we've got our employees over here, and we've got the number of hours they worked each week. But what we really want, we've also got totals over here, but we don't really care about that. What we really care about, which we don't have, is we'd like to have this new column over here which says what is the last week that each employee worked. So like for this employee, it should be 2015 week 1, because in week 2, it looks like maybe they were scheduled for some hours, but they canceled them, so they got 0. And in this week, it was blank. So what we want is for each employee, we want the last week that they worked. Did it last week using regular old Excel, and today we're going to be doing it using PowerQuery. So let's close this raw data out. Start off by heading up to PowerQuery. We're going to get our data from an Excel file, and I'm going to navigate, find my data. Here it's week 1. It's going to bring this up over here. It's going to say, hey, where is the data? Is it in sheet 1? Yes, it is. And we're going to go ahead and click edit because we want to bring open the PowerQuery editor. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to promote row 1 to headers. So I'm actually just going to do this the quick way and right click here and do use first row as headers. Okay, boom, that's done. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, well, we can go ahead and keep the totals column. That's not a big deal. So now that I've got this right here, this looks like what I want is this plus 1 extra column that has the last week that they worked. So I'm going to head over to the advanced editor, and I'm going to define a new variable, and I'm just going to call this start, and this is just going to be the thing that we're going to add stuff to later on. So it's going to be a very simple definition. Just this is all semantic. It's all to make the code a little easier to read. We're going to add a step which just defines the start table as this right here. So I'm going to click over here and do start and click done. Okay, exact same thing. Not super impressive. No big deal. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and delete this total column because we don't want it. We're going to remove it. So now we've got something closer to the data we want. What we really want is we want to be able to just for each employee have what the last week was that they worked so that we can add that over here to the start column. So to do that, we're going to we're going to click on that column, shift click over here, right click, and we're going to unpivot these columns. Boom. And so now we've unpivoted the column, so let's head back here. So for each employee, there's now going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, well, 5 rows. Actually, it'll be 4. There'll be 3 because it doesn't count these nulls. But there's going to be a week. For every week up here that they actually worked, that's going to correspond to a new row in here. So you could see in 2014, week 51, they worked 29 hours, and in 2015, week 1, they worked 20. So this is pretty good. I don't really like this attribute or value name, and since I've got the formula bar checked up here, that's this guy right here, I'm going to just go up here into my code and very quickly change this from attribute to week and from value to hours. Okay, click on that. Great, that looks good. Okay, couple more things we need to do. The first one is we want to remove any row that has an hours of 0 because it's the same thing basically as not working. So we're going to filter that out. So we've already sort of essentially filtered out nulls because they don't get counted in the unpivot. And now we're going to remove the weeks where people worked 0 hours. Okay, that's good. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to basically say we're going to do a group by. So what we're going to end up with is rather than having several different rows for each employee is going to have one row. And we're going to be able to perform some aggregations for the employees where they have multiple rows. So since we're collapsing sort of this row and this row into a single row, we're going to be able to add an aggregation which says, go over here to the week column and get the max of that week. And since you and I, people, we know this as 2014 week 51 and 2015 week 01, PowerQuery doesn't see them as that. It just sees them as numbers. And it just sees this as a higher number than this. So when we take the max of these two values, it's going to return 2015 week 1, which is going to end up being the last week that employee 1 worked. So let's do that. I'm going to right click on there. I'm going to do a group by. Okay, well, what do we want to group by? Well, we want to group by employee 1, which means when we're done, we're going to get, well, I guess there's 8 employees, so we should have 8 rows. And we're going to add an aggregation column. The aggregation column is going to be called last week worked. I'm not going to add spaces because I kind of like the way that looks. And we're going to perform a max, and we're going to perform a max on week. So I'm going to click OK. And so now, let's just jump back here real quick. Now for employee 1, there were 2 rows, and there were weeks 2014-51 and 2015-01. So now we just got 1 for employee 1 and the maximum week that they worked, which happens to be the last week that they worked. Okay, this is a little technical because we're going to join this table with the start table back over here. In the start table, we've already got a column called employees, and so we're going to rename this just so that they don't, when we join the 2 tables together, there's not 2 columns that have the same name because that'll cause an error. So I'm just going to call this employee LUT for lookup table. Okay, and now I'm going to head over to the advanced editor. I'm going to give myself a little white space right there just to make this easier to read. And I could just rename this, and maybe processor-wise that's a little bit faster, but this is a small set of data we're working with, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to create a variable defined lookup table, LUT, and it's just going to be that right there, Control-C, Control-V. Don't forget your comma. Okay, and just so you guys, if you're wondering to yourself, isn't this going to be the exact same thing? Yes, it's going to be the exact same thing. I've just given it a new useful name. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take the start table and we're going to join it with the lookup table, which is to say we're going to add all the columns, these columns from lookup table, to the start table. And it's going to use the employee column as the key, as the thing it knows where to join that. So here for the first row, it's going to say, hey, I want columns for employee 1. So it's going to head over here and say, oh, well, that's employee 1. So I'm going to add employee lookup table that, and last weekend worked that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do it. Maybe if my explanation is confusing when you see it, see the finished products, maybe it'll make a little more sense. So we're going to do comma, enter. So this, I'm going to call this joined, and we're going to use the table.join function. Table.join function takes 5 arguments. The first one is the table to start with. Well, we're going to start with the start table, or the left table, if you want to think of it that way, if you know SQL and all that good stuff. Okay, so in the start table, which column we're going to join on? Well, that's going to be the employee column. I remember we had to rename it here in the lookup table column, but in start, it's just employee. And we're going to join it. Well, what table would you like to join it with? We're going to join it with the lookup table. That's where we're going to add columns from. And in the lookup table, what is the column that you want to use to join? Well, it's employee LUT. Okay. And the last but not least is we have to tell it what kind of join we want to do. So we're going to do a join kind.left outer. That's the kind of join. Whoops. That's not a dot. And that's not a shift. Okay. So that's the kind of join where you add columns from this table to this table, which is what we want. I'm going to hit enter. Let's see. Does that line up? Hey, it lines up. How about that? Okay, I've got my commas. Those look good. Let's see if I can do this without spitting out an error. So I hit OK. Oh, I misspelled it. Hold on. Hold on. Oh, maybe I didn't misspell it. Employee. How about that? There we go. Okay. So we started here, and we ended up here. So we added these 2 columns from here. Now notice in here, there were 2 employees, if you head back to this table right here. Employees 9 and 10. Employee 9 never worked anything. They were never even assigned a single shift. I'm not even sure how they got in the database. So over here, they don't appear as having the last week worked because really there was no last week that they worked. They got filtered out. And same with employee 10. They don't appear over here in this list because if you ask the question, what was the last week that they worked? Well, they didn't. They were assigned 2 shifts and they worked none of them. So when you come here to join, what you find is that for any employee that actually worked, you've got the last week that they worked. And for any employee that did not, you've got null. Okay, so we're in the home stretch. We're going to go ahead and remove this column because we don't really need it anymore. And here I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to right click. Let's see. I'm going to replace values. And I'm going to replace null, which is to say empty. This helps if you spell it right. And I'm going to replace it with, we can replace it with a text string. Assuming that I want to send this off to some other analytics package, some other piece of software, it's probably best to keep the data types the same. So rather than using text, I'm just going to use a number. So I'm just going to replace it with 0. I'm going to click OK. So now you just know that, well, this is clearly a year, and if it's 0, it means that there just wasn't anything. Okay, so I'm also going to right-click. I'm going to change the type to whole number just to make that really clear to any other program that I throw this into. And we're good. So now I started. I guess I technically started here, but I essentially started right here. We were able to use PowerQuery to build this lookup table, which found the last week that each employee worked. We joined that together with the start table to get this guy right here. And when we were all done, we ended up with, for every employee, there is the last week that they worked. So let's go ahead. We're going to close and load that. And we are all done. Okay, well, I do hope that was helpful, and I will see you next video.